What's really happening is we're sort of building this silicon brain that's not really a replacement for the human brain, but it's a complement. Because we're so obsessed with kind of the zero sum comparison of like, well, computers can do this and humans can do that, and when it's going to take all of our jobs. And there's serious implications there. It's not, the world will be very different, and there's going to be a lot of dislocation, but there's going to be a lot of benefit.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Next, the podcast about the people
and trends
that are shaping the future of business. I'm Diane Brady.
And I'm Kristen Stoller.
This week, we are speaking with a man who has dodged Kristen for several years, international man of mystery, now appearing for the first time before you, Kristen.
Phew, finally, Drew Houston, the CEO of Dropbox. Diane, I have been trying to get him on stage with me for so long. Today is a monumental day. I'm finally getting to talk to him with you.
Now, he is getting out there more right now. What do you think is the genesis of this desire to now be back in the public eye?
Yeah, it's weird, because he's part of this like golden generation of Silicon Valley founders. The 2012 era, they were all hot. They were all on magazine
the Zuckerberg
covers.
generation.
Yes, and he's now on the board of Meta, so full circle. But he was really hot for a while, really public, and then I felt like just went quiet for a bit. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was because he was being disrupted by Google, by Apple, or what, but now he's back.
They were being disrupted by everybody. I think Dropbox, in my experience, was a company that became ubiquitous. Like they were doing all kinds. They were competing with regard to, email, file sharing. And I think all of these, Google Drive, think about that.
Right.
All these different capabilities came out. It reminds me a little bit, I did a book with John Chambers, as some listeners know, and he spoke about buying the Flip camera. And practically mere months later, Steve Jobs stood up at one of those Apple events and of course came out with an iPod where you could do the exact same thing and connect it,
his
to
stomach
the
must have
internet.
just dropped.
And game over. So there are times when the big guys or your peers come out with functionality that essentially takes the heart of your business away, or some parts of your business, and that's what happened to Dropbox.
Yeah, because I was using Dropbox to store my photos or to send photos to family. But then
there are better ways to send photos to family.
Well, I think at the time, no, because now obviously I just text it or use iCloud or whatever, or Instagram, honestly. Do I even send photos anymore? Probably not.
I use Dropbox for files and when I've been writing books, sharing files, and of course, I think it's a good way to keep your life with you, because I think of it more as a consumer tool than an enterprise tool. And
I agree.
That's interesting as well to talk to him about.
Right, because now they want to go into enterprise with AI and compete on the productivity stack.
But let's get back to Drew a second. I mean, he was only 24 when he started this company writing lines of code.
Right.
I don't know what you were doing at 24.
I had just gotten to New York. I could not have been a CEO at 24. And it's interesting to get into the mind of someone who was a CEO at 24 and then how they lead in their 40s.
Yeah. 18 years he's been on the job. He, I think, is very much a student of leadership and somebody who's also, I think, a student of how do you be a better person. Again, this is from what I've read. I've not met him either. So we are going to be right back with the elusive Drew Houston. Generative AI has been a transformative force in the business landscape for the last 18 months. According to the latest Fortune Deloitte CEO survey, more than half of CEOs are experimenting with generative AI in their own daily activities and, of course, trying to spread it throughout their organizations. I'm joined by Jason Grzadis, the CEO of Deloitte US, which is the longtime sponsor of this podcast. Jason, good to see you.
Hi, Diane. It's great to be with you.
How are businesses integrating AI into their organizations? Where do you see the most substantial benefits?
I think it's true, as you say, that every organization wants to capitalize on the benefits of AI, particularly generative AI. The benefits have been largely around efficiencies to date and looking for ways to automate routine tasks. The promise is there for more insight-driven use cases and innovation use cases. That's the next stage. We're seeing organizations looking to move from proofs of concept and pilots to see these technologies and models put in place in true operational uses at scale.
When you think about how much change there's been in the last 18 months, really curious, how do you think it's going to evolve in the next 18 months, 36 months?
I think we're actually needing to change our timing horizon. By all indications, we're more in 6-month intervals. And I think that's exciting, but also a challenge. Enterprises aren't accustomed to working in that type of cadence and with that type of pace. And so the winners, if you will be those that can assimilate this technology that quickly, which I think is putting real strain on organizations' ability to adapt that quickly. This is a perfect instance where leadership has to be in sync to assimilate technology that quickly. I think as a CEO, it's important that we lead by example. So I've been through all the training, I've been through all the productivity tools that we have available within our organization. But then more broadly, we've embarked upon a significant investment to deploy this across all we do.
I'm feeling the urgency, Jason. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Diane.
Okay, so Drew, I am thrilled to be here with you because I have been trying to talk to you on stage for years at conferences. You've been my white whale. I've always wanted to talk to you. I'm thrilled you're here. So I'm curious, what brings you our way now?
Oh, well, thank you. It's great to be here. And I'm here in New York because Dropbox, we just launched a big update to our new product called Dropbox Dash, which is the AI search and knowledge management product that goes beyond your files to organizing all your cloud content. So we can talk more about that. But I'm also here just visiting the team, visiting our customers, stopped by MIT for a day, my alma mater. So it's been a great trip.
But let me pause on Kristen's thing a second. She's been trying to get you for years, and now I've seen you out a fair bit. Is there a reason why you are coming out now to talk about Dropbox more? And what's the incentive?
Well, it's a super exciting time both in the industry and then for Dropbox. So this is the biggest evolution of our product or of what Dropbox does for people since we founded the company. When I started Dropbox, it's because I forgot my thumb drive and I needed to keep my files in sync. But fast forward to today, it's actually back to a lot of the same problems. It's like really hard to find and organize and share my information at work because it's scattered across all these 100 tabs in your browser in addition to 100 files on your desktop. And with all these new tools, it's like we've gotten a bit too much of a good thing, and now and then the unintended consequences of that. So a lot of things are worse today in that experience than 20 years ago. Like take something like search, right? Back then, you just had one search box, it searches your hard drive, maybe you search your email. Finding stuff is not that big a deal. Today, you've got 10 search boxes that each search 10% of your stuff, and this is insane. And then as a result, you try to find things, but then end up slacking someone and be like, hey, could you just go find that thing for me, and then interrupt their day. And so instead, we're like, this should be completely reimagined. You should have one search box that searches everything, and then you should be able to also ask in natural language. So you have both like Google style results, but also like ChatGPT that's connected to your stuff. And so we're out there because it's like really exciting. I'm really proud and excited about the work that we're doing. And then also it's just a really exciting time in tech in general with AI.
Who are some of the mentors who've been important to you along the way?
It's been more of a rotating community than a single mentor. So I might say it started with my Y Combinator batch. So Dropbox's first investment was from Y Combinator. They put you, back then it was much smaller, so you had maybe 18 companies, 50 other founders. And there's a lot you could learn from your peers all going through the same thing at the same time. But also, I had a lot of friends that were a year or two ahead. And so you can sort of learn what's around the corner that way and learn a different set of things. And then you can sometimes get a little bit of time with people who are 10, 20 years ahead. And then you learn a different set of things from them. And then beyond that, you can also read books and get access to a lot of those people or their thinking, even without having to meet them in real life. And so for me, it's really been people at all those different timescales, and then also learning a lot from reading and then triangulating back to Dropbox's situation.
What are some of the books that have shaped you as a leader?
A lot of the classics. So some of my favorites are The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. I love Andy Grove, so both High Over Management.
Only the Paranoid Survive.
Only the Paranoid Survive. We might talk more about that. It was really influential for me. And then And then others that are a little less about sort of like the management. So one is about the mindsets you need to cultivate while being, while being CEO or having any other demanding job. I mean, a lot of it is what you do, but a lot of leadership is really who you are, and how you, and sort of the field you create around you. And so, um, a lot of there's a great book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, uh, by Diana Chapman and some of her co-authors, that was really instrumental in helping me with some of the things that you don't learn from sort of a textbook, around how to lead a company, how to navigate adversity, how to be the kind of person that other people want to follow. So these things around character.
Drew, as I used to cover young entrepreneurs for a very long time, and I think what interests me about you is you're kind of part of this like golden age of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, started in their 20s back in like the mid to early 2000s. We don't really see a lot of that. And at the time, you were out there, you were so public. And I know your background is in coding and engineering, and kind of since then you've been a little more private. Can you talk to us about like your shift in the public eye? What made you be really out there at first, then kind of go inward, and then why are you out there again now?
Well, for the first several years of Dropbox, it was, we had that experience everybody wants to have, right? So that .com dream. Honestly, I was in high school. I thought I missed it because I was, again in school while the
Come
first
to my
.com.
parties. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, I was like, man, like, because I was graduated in 2005-ish. Talk about that separately. But fortunately, there are these moments in where you basically have these new eras of computing that drive so much of the innovation, and basically they reset the scoreboard and make all kinds of new things possible. So even Dropbox in the first place couldn't have really existed in the same way without the emergence of the public cloud with AWS, which started in 2006. So we were early customers of Amazon. And I was able to start with a credit card, where a lot of the previous generation of storage entrepreneurs told me quite a lot how frustrating it was and how expensive it was to rack a terabyte of storage and how much capital it took, and so on. And so we benefit a lot from things like a public cloud, mobile, right? The iPhone launch was announced maybe a couple months after I wrote my first lines of code for Dropbox. And so we were riding these kind of twin tidal waves of mobile and cloud and SaaS, and that is where, and that made Dropbox possible. So there's a lot to talk about as the world was figuring out. Okay, maybe most typical people didn't really understand what the cloud was or how it could help them, and a lot of what we tried to do is simplify the technology and take it the last mile to people and say, like, look, you just don't have to carry around a thumb drive anymore or email yourself files, because all of your stuff can be in one place. You can get to it from any device. And I wouldn't say I so much like intentionally went inward as much as we had a pretty full plate along the way in terms of scaling the company and professionalizing it. And after we sort of, and then things like setting up the company to be on track to go public and the IPO and so on. And then what we're seeing now is a lot like what we saw in 2007, 2008 with the emergence of AI, which, it's probably the biggest tidal wave we'll see in our lifetimes.
So you feel you want to be talking about it more, or you need to get out there more?
Well, we have this new product which
Right.
rides that wave.
Which also gets to the Peter Drucker question. You mentioned him initially. What business are you in? Is it fair to say, okay, you are with a cloud storage company? What is Dropbox now, and what will it be?
Well, we were a cloud storage company.
Yeah, I know.
Yep. But when you really thought, or when I thought more deeply and talked to customers about, how do they see Dropbox? I expected them to say things about file synchronization or something, but actually they use a lot of different languages. Like, oh, this is like the home for all of my most important stuff. Or this is like the studio or sort of workplace where my dreams come to life, or like, I'm a nomadic entrepreneur. I can actually live in Bali and still run my business because everything's in Dropbox. I don't need to be in an office. Don't need a file server. So I think it's always this iterative process. You're sort of co-evolving what the product is with your customers, and the value you're providing is shifting too. So in the beginning, we really did think about Dropbox as cloud storage. We use that kind of language, but then as we recognize, and then people use Dropbox for all kinds of things, right? And actually, we struggled to define what it was, because you ask someone like, what's Dropbox? Who's your customer? What's it for? You're like, I don't know. What's a computer for? What's a phone for? It's really such a horizontal and broad application, and we didn't really take too much of an opinion over what you should or shouldn't do with Dropbox. In the initial years, that was a blessing, because it meant we had basically like a market of anyone with an internet
like a
connection.
blank canvas.
Totally. But then several years in, it actually it turned into a bit of a curse, because what it really meant was, we have this very horizontal product. Dropbox is for people. Is Dropbox for consumers? Is it for businesses, little businesses, big ones? It's like, yes, all of the above. Okay, is it for photo sharing? Is it for productivity? Is it for backup? Yes, all of the above. But the problem was, each of those areas was its own little battlefield with different competitors, and suddenly we found ourselves, going up into the big leagues pretty fast with the scale of the company, and next thing you know, you find yourself fighting with just about everyone in our case.
I think that kind of brings us to today too, because the productivity stack place is so crowded. You've got Microsoft, you've got OpenAI, you've got Google, so it seems like you're facing the same problem again. So how are you planning to compete?
Well, just recognizing that there's all kinds of problems hidden in plain sight, and the nature of technology is, for every problem it solves, it creates a new one. And in a lot of and for Dropbox, well, what does that mean? Well, we didn't just create a storage company. It was really, we were wondering, like, is there a better way to, why is it so hard for us to find and organize and share and protect our most basic information? And back then, that information would have been files. The scattering would have been across these different devices and operating system. Like, okay, how do I get to my my iPhone to talk to my Windows PC? Today, the problems we're actually back to the same problems. Like, it's really difficult to find and organize and share our most basic information at work. And as we've adopted all these new tools, right? And but I think there's a sense that we've gotten maybe too much of a good thing with this tool proliferation and this information overload that we have, and the complexity that arises when we're all working in these distributed ways. And we also have this rise of AI, but AI is quite limited by the information you're able to feed into it. So in a lot of ways, we're rebuilding Dropbox for the modern era, given this different canvas, not unlike when Netflix had to go from DVD mailing to streaming. With Dropbox, we're going from syncing your files to organizing all of your cloud content. So Dash is basically what gives you one search box that connects to all of your different apps. And instead of having to go into Slack or Google Docs or Salesforce or your email to search for the same thing, you can do that from one place. And then you can also ask questions in natural language, and including a lot of the questions that ChatGPT can't answer because it's not connected to your stuff. So if you ask ChatGPT, like, oh, where's that slide from last year's product launch? Or when does our office lease expire? Can't answer because it's not connected. And you have to go find a thing and upload. You can upload a PDF or something, but in a lot of ways, we're simplifying AI at work, and in very similar ways that we simplified the cloud for people with Dropbox 1.0.
I want to ask about, you're now a mature company. You're a mature CEO, even though you're younger than most people who, before they get into the CEO role. And so now rather than the disruptor, people talk about Dropbox and say, is it the disrupted? Because new technologies, of course, create new fields of competitors. And I know that you've had, some slowing growth. You had to do some layoffs. Talk about that trajectory and where it feels like a threat and how you disrupt yourself in this environment.
Well, you have to disrupt yourself. And if you're lucky enough to have to start and run a company that has a 10th birthday, usually by then there's some kind of big disruptive shift in the market. And if you're building something valuable, you're going to have competitors, and that's something we've certainly observed. So file syncing, we're 18 years in. It's a pretty mature category. It's a pretty well solved problem, um, and you have to keep reinventing yourself. But in our case, we're fortunate in that we're sort of back to a lot of the same problems. So it's not this kind of crazy disconnect. It's really more of a reinvention, in the current context. So Dash is still just about taking care of your stuff and organizing all of your cloud content. And we're building on a foundation of organizing all your files. So it's a pretty natural evolution. But I see it as having a lot of parallels with actually that Netflix example, right? So think about Netflix circa 2010. They started by mailing you DVDs, but really the value what we all wanted from Netflix and still get from Netflix is let me press play on what I want to see, right? And they had to manage that generational transition from DVD mailing to streaming, where you look at the business they came from, you would have said a lot of negative things about it. Like, oh man, DVD mailing, Blockbuster, it's dinosaur.
I remember Jeff Bewkes called them the Albanian army at one point. And I think Ted Sarandos said he'd like to be speaking Albanian now too.
And Diane, I want to follow up on something you said, because you mentioned the layoffs. And I think, Drew, you're pretty vocal about, I don't think AI is coming for our jobs. You reassure all your employees. How do you reconcile, layoffs with that state of mind?
Well, you have to align your investments with their growth potential. So, meaning you have to shift resources to invest on the future, and then often make some really painful decisions about, recognizing where you're overinvested. And often that means, you try to do that wherever you can without losing jobs, but then there's also a talent shift or mix shift that you need to drive. So, for example, with Dash, we need AI engineers, right? And we've always had machine learning and AI in the company, but we need a lot more of them than we would have in the past. And so you have to make space. You have to always, once you're at scale and just a sustainable tech company, you're always optimizing your core business, and you're always planting seeds for tomorrow's core business and incubating things. And what we found with AI is that actually the customer interest in these markets are moving way faster than things were moving 5-10 years ago. And so you have to be adaptable and adjust, and we're always thinking about how we disrupt ourselves. Files themselves have been kind of disrupted by things like Google Docs and so on. And as we've had all this tool proliferation, it's actually caused this new problem of this really fragmented and overwhelming experience. And as we've gotten Gen AI and seen how powerful it is, and then suddenly there's this obvious gap where wait, I can't really use it at work if it's not connected to my stuff. And so you have to recognize where, and then things like the pandemic turned the world upside down. But I think in all these cases, you have to find the opportunity in what looks like a problem. So for the pandemic, we were like, man, so this is a problem, right? Going into lockdown, and all the disruption that entailed. However, it was also this huge opportunity, and that this is the biggest changes. Well, this is the biggest change to knowledge work, in our lifetimes, right? Suddenly, work really is decoupled from the physical environment, or laws of physics, and the stuff that people have dreamed about. People have been dreaming about telework since the 50s and 60s. We're like, wait, actually, now it's here, and there's all this new flexibility you get and all these benefits, but there's a lot of problems too. It's like this really, sitting on Zoom all day is a really exhausting experience. There's no substitute for human connection. Our biological wiring isn't changing. So a lot of companies were thinking about, all right, how quickly can we hit the rewind button and go back? But we saw that, okay, the world's just not going to be configured the same way going forward. Maybe going to offices is going to be, or forcing people back to offices is going to be
Didn't you move to Austin? You moved to Austin during the pandemic. Why'd you do that? Because I know you're now back in the warm climes of Silicon Valley.
Well, I think I was sort of beta testing our thesis here, which is that, with the pandemic, we're like, all right, people can work from anywhere. That's not going away. People have all this flexibility that they might not have had, and
Your CEO's off to Texas.
Yeah. So my wife is from Texas and grew up there. We'd been thinking about where do we want to settle down? We were living in the city, or San Francisco rather, and and we're like getting ready to have kids and stuff, and so we're like, oh well, maybe we'll get out. Maybe we'll get out of California. Maybe we'll really send it. And so during the pandemic, we moved to Austin, uh, which was great. That said, it was really hard to stay out of California because we had such a pretty deep roots with our family and friends and everything.
A lot of your compatriots have gone off to the 202 area code, at least temporarily. And I mean, Washington, of course. What's the mood in the tech community right now with regards to, obviously there's the opportunities of AI, et cetera, but just, of course, there is the overlay of regulation, politics, et cetera. How are you feeling about it?
Well, I think there's never a dull moment. I think it's hard to predict exactly where things land. I think certainly with any any big change in, at least I'll just say in technology, these are big disruptions that also impact society, right?
And you're on the board of Meta too, so which I think,
Yeah.
I wonder how you're looking at it as a board member there too.
Yeah, I think everybody's trying to stay in front of everything that's happening. And again, I think it's a little tough to predict exactly, what's going to happen next week.
I know. I mean, I can sense we're not going to get you to comment on Mark Zuckerberg's chain or anything like that. I get that. But I do think it's important. I mean, I remember I knew Jim Balsillie quite well from Research in Motion.
Sure.
And I remember, he was going to California saying it's so hard to compete with that ecosystem of money, talent, technology. Is there, so there's always something unique there, but it's always been a little bit separate from Washington too. If you went to Washington, it was, very transactional to lobby for a certain rule or regulation. What's your interactions now? Are you spending more time in Washington? Do you feel like it's a new day and a new dawn for regulation? I mean, these must impact your business as well.
I mean, we're able right now to spend most of our time building. I mean, certainly we operate globally and are and then all the regulations around privacy or cloud or AI. We're subject to those, but for us, it's been a relatively straightforward process. And yeah, I think there's certainly it's been interesting to see some tech leaders move into government, and we'll see. I'm tuned to next episode of that. It's like, who knows what's going to happen?
Okay. Well, I'll pivot a little bit because Drew, we're journalists. Diane and I are a sucker for a good story. I need to ask you to tell us a story. Looking back as a founder / CEO, what's been the hardest moment for you? Is there a specific moment that you can pinpoint and you're like, oh, I did that wrong. I wish I could go back, rewind, and I do it this way?
Yeah. I think the most challenging moments or periods are when you're in the big leagues or you're making the playoffs, and it feels like every game you get a harder opponent and they can knock you around a lot more. So I think certainly the period in sort of mid 2015, 2016 was really challenging because as I was saying earlier, Dropbox was sort of unintentionally fighting this like many front war where in storage, for example, we were competing against the operating system or the device, right? If you buy a new iPhone, you're probably not going to have an option to back up to Dropbox. You're going to go to iCloud, right? And so there's a period of a few years where all of the incumbents launched competing products, right? So you had iCloud coming from Apple, you had Google Drive, you had OneDrive from Microsoft, and other examples where basically what you've built, like other people can adapt it or kind of clone what you've built. They can bundle it with their platforms and they can kill you by destroying the economics. And so we got some hard lessons in that. And the most notable one was when we were scaling Dropbox, we recognized that a lot of people were using, we're sharing photos using Dropbox. And then we were just like, well, there's just one problem.
That's how I used it.
Yeah.
That was my primary use.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we're like, just one problem. Like the product wasn't really designed for that specific use case. Like you don't really think of photos in the perfect UI being like files and folders per se. I mean, there are benefits of doing that, But you think about it, galleries and
Yeah.
people and events and things like that.
Flickr.
So, and on our phones for a while, in the beginning, we were all like limited by the storage on the device, and it's like,
Right.
well, no, I want my whole life in my pocket, and so, um, and like I want to have a really great email experience, and maybe it shouldn't just be like a squished version of Outlook. Like there are ways to innovate for this new medium of mobile. And so we'd been spreading our wings, and we're like, okay, well, instead of trying to build photo sharing into Dropbox, we built a separate app called Carousel. We bought a company called Mailbox, that was really the most popular and most innovative early email client. I mean, they had a beta waiting list of 1 million people on it, just to give you a sense of the
Wow.
intensity of demand. And yet, fast forward a year or two, and suddenly, the swipes or snoozes are these things that the Mailbox founders innovated in. Like, we're part of Gmail, part of Apple Mail, part of everything. Google Photos launched, and was similarly like a cloud. It's similar to Carousel, is like your whole life in
It
your
sounds
pocket.
less like a moment than a "this is your life" kind of like this. That it's been one thing after another.
It is, but I think this was a challenging moment because it's sort of like, well, okay, so Google Photos is sort of crystallizes it, where it's like, all right, now, they've duplicated a lot of the functionality, but they also just didn't have a business model. They're just like, we're just going to give unlimited storage for life for free to everyone, and it's pretty tough to compete with that.
With free.
Yeah. And so, if you're sitting there running a company, and something like that happens, a lot of people inside the company are like, whoa, were we out in front of that? We probably could have predicted that. Peanut gallery outside's pretty big now. They're like, oh, Dropbox, first dead decacorn. And so suddenly the narrative shifts pretty fast, pretty like overnight, from, you're the little engine that could, you're putting you on magazine covers smiling, to like, you're the little engine that couldn't, you're the, this is all a house of cards, you're going to get killed by competitors.
How'd that make you feel?
It's not fun. Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah.
And so I think it's sort of, your induction into the big leagues. Like, I think one thing you have to recognize, or, how do you handle that? First, it's really not about you. It's like, it's the game. And you can't really control what your opponents are doing. You can only control how well you play. And the only useful response is to be like, okay, how do we, play this game better? And fortunately, unlike in sports or something, like, business is not zero sum. Like, there's always, and customers never run out of problems. They're never like, I don't know anyone who's like, oh, my technology works perfectly, please don't change anything. There's all these new issues. But and I'd learned from, he's talking about mentors. Bill Campbell was an early Netscape exec and an Apple exec, and he talked about their experience of Netscape fighting Internet Explorer. And I remember asking him, or just trying to commiserate with him, like, man, that's so rough. Like, Microsoft copied you guys, and kind of killed you. And he sort of snorted and laughed. He's like, Microsoft didn't kill us; we killed ourselves.
Yeah. Although Microsoft was taken to court
They
about it, there's that. But I mean, let's talk about then how you did remain relevant. I mean, here we are today, circa 2025. You're still here with a company and new products. So, in light of what would seem to, disrupt, disintermediate, render you obsolete, you're still here. So, what did you do to keep yourself both top of mind? Is it a cost game, a technology game, some combination of
a marketing game?
We had to focus. So that multi-front war I was talking about is that with storage, we fight one set of people. Photo sharing, we're fighting Facebook, Instagram, Snap, a whole different set of people. Productivity, we're fighting Microsoft and Google. And so we had to really figure out, okay, and actually going back to reading, there's a book called Only the Paranoid Survive by Andy Grove.
Yep.
Briefly, he says the industry is defined by these strategic inflection points. Intel actually didn't start. We know them as the microprocessor company, but they actually didn't start in microprocessors. They were a memory. They sold RAM, so the memory that goes in computers. And they found their own version of a carousel mailbox situation where suddenly they had all this Japanese competition that was just doing things cheaper, better, faster, higher quality, and subsidized by the government. So just sort of, they were no longer, this was just like no longer a winnable game. And Andy talks about navigating that. It's like, well, usually he's like, first we assess the situation as if we were like consultants to ourselves. We're like, well, if we were consultants to ourselves, what would we do with this competition? They'd be like, well, we'd get out of the memory business and go all in on this little sketchy microprocessor thing, because we're doomed in our core business. And then there's this memorable moment in the book where basically they were like, okay, let's they sort of walk out of the room and come back in. They're like, all right, we're getting out of the memory business. And he talks about that decision where he's like, usually CEO, well, first of all, just to recognize the magnitude, that's like Google saying they're getting out of search. Like, this is not an easy thing. And then second, as Andy talked about the thought process, he's like, well, you got to navigate these inflection points, and when you're in one, then you, as a CEO, you're tempted to hedge and try to keep your options open. You do not want to do that. You want to pick one thing. He quoted Mark Twain. He's like, you want to put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket. And so I'm literally in July of 2015, or when that was, I was like rereading that. I'm like, oh man, okay, we got to shut all this stuff down. We got to kill carousel, kill mailbox, stop trying to compete in storage, don't do consumer stuff. Let's go entirely into productivity. And a couple of things inform that. So one is, as I was saying earlier, just talking to our customers, people don't see Dropbox as a hard drive. They see it as a workplace. Only problem is we didn't really build we'd never intended for Dropbox to be that, but like, what if we did? And then secondly, I had to think a little more critically about, why should Dropbox exist? And I remember sitting and be like, my files are now in sync. Like, maybe we've done it, well, now what? But then if we were honest with ourselves, we're like, look, probably the phone would have figured out a way to sync to the cloud, and probably someone else would have had the idea that you can have a photo gallery that's not limited by the storage on your phone, et cetera. So we're like, maybe we're not contributing as much there, but where the problems really aren't solving themselves are really at work, where even back then, I just thought about my own experience running a company, and I'm like, okay, I'm in meetings all day, emails all night. Is this it?
Yeah.
First world problem, but I'm like, what's up with that?
Did you think 18 years ago that you would still be CEO, or did you think,
No.
I'm going to found this and step back at some point?
I didn't really have a long-term plan. I was a little insecure about being CEO, honestly.
Really? Why?
Because I grew up as an engineer. Pretty central casting, like growing a kid, coding, MIT, computer science. And I knew I wanted to be a founder, but I wasn't really sure because I knew about the technology, so I felt very comfortable with technology, but I didn't know I wanted to be a CEO, because all I could see was just the more I learned about it, the less I realized I knew, and the more intimidating it became. But what was comforting was recognizing, like, yeah, guess what? Everyone's a first-time CEO at some point. Like, no one comes out of the womb,
CEO.
being
No
a
one
CEO,
grows up
right?
saying they want to be a CEO usually either. They end up,
Yeah.
in
And
some other way.
yeah, and so did I. And then, but unfortunately, I had a lot of role models to look to, a lot of engineers who learned the business side on the job. When I thought about it, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is both. There is capacity for folks with everybody's got to learn the CEO part on the job in some form or fashion, and then in a lot of ways, my engineering courses were a lot tougher than some of the other, conceptually tougher, and then a lot of the other disciplines I had to learn. And then fortunately, I just found all the other disciplines interesting.
Where do you get the most joy out of your job now?
I like the challenge, and I like the impact. So when I was thinking about what do I do in my career, I wanted something that always had a high learning curve, and that has not been that. It's delivered on that front. And I want to play the game at the highest level. And so I think during that difficult period, I think these were the conversations I kind of had to have with myself. Like, what do I really want to do? It's not. I've kind of accumulated the merit badges that I want from startup land, where you sort of like, I'll raise money at this valuation, or hit these user or revenue numbers. And at some point, you just sort of, you're like, big numbers bigger. Like, now what? And so I think part of it for me was reconnecting to a sense of purpose. So figuring out, we went into productivity, not just because that's where our customers were, all that helped, but I'm like, man, the way we work is really broken, and then technology is going the wrong direction, where we're creating this incredibly overwhelming experience. And email works fine if you get 5 emails a day, but not 500 or 5,000. And like, no one seems to be fixing that. So I was like, I am very motivated by this problem. And then the reason why I want to be CEO is because, this is it's a challenging and interesting, there's a craft of being a CEO, and you can do this for your whole professional lifetime and still not feel like you've hit, that you're done. And unlike a lot of other disciplines like, math or sports or chess or something, where you might age out or plateau, this is something that would be like endlessly interesting. And then just impacts, like the ability, I never get tired of looking over people's shoulders at a Starbucks to see if their laptop has a little Dropbox icon on it, and to sort of see it turn into a verb. And then to be able to do that in lots of new ways and in bigger ways with this platform, I want to be building things like Dash that sort of make Dropbox 1.0 look like a footnote.
So say Dash solves these future of work issues. Would you ever want to found another company again? And what other problem would you want to solve if so?
Well, I mean, one nice thing about being founder and CEO is the company can have a funny way of being interested in what you want to be interested in. So, and I think every company has like, multiple lifetimes. So take Apple, right? I think what we're going through is not terribly different from, Apple was the Mac company, but then they became, the iPod company, the iPhone company, and now they're another round of reinvention services and VR and all kinds of other things. And so fortunately, I spend most of my time thinking about Dropbox, and there's like no shortage of interesting things to do. So I'm sort of running the company I want to run. But for sure, there's, if I couldn't run Dropbox, I think there's lots of other applications of AI, and there's ways to be making life easier for
So
people.
still AI.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we go to the 30,000 foot view as we sort of round out this conversation, let's not talk necessarily about the products,
Sure.
but more generally, it's such an interesting time right now because you do have this new dawn of innovation. What's on your radar that you look at that fascinates you outside of your immediate neighborhood?
Well, I just love the science and the technology of AI, and and I'm captivated by the idea of kind of intelligence on tap, right? And I'm like coding like an 18-year-old again, where that's really how I figure out what, or it's a big input to how I figure out what Dropbox should do, is like really play with these technologies early. And so a lot of the large models had a chance to play with those things before.
Do we even need
ChatGPT.
coders in the age of LLMs? Of course, to some extent we do, but that's one of the areas people think about true democratization,
Yeah.
really, of that.
Well, I think what's really happening is we're sort of building this silicon brain that's not really a replacement for the human brain, but it's a complement. And because we're so obsessed with kind of the zero-sum comparison of like, well, computers can do this and humans can do that, and when is it going to take all of our jobs? And there's serious implications there. It's not, the world will be very different, and there's gonna be a lot of dislocation, but there's gonna be a lot of benefit, right? And when I say the silicon brains, like now the fact that computers can see and hear and talk and read and write and plan and do things at a superhuman
Talk
level.
to each other without us there.
Yeah. It's like that's the most kind of crazy technology invented in my lifetime. And so what I think about is like, instead of thinking about, human brain or silicon brain, it's really like, no, how do we put these together, right? And I think there's a common mistake that people make, which is they sort of jump all the way from, oh, something is possible, to like, it will be fully autonomous, right? And self-driving, right, is a good example where the idea of a self-driving car captured all of our imaginations 15 years ago. Similar conversations, like there's not going to be in 10 minutes, there's not going to be another human driver on the road, and then we're going to lose millions of jobs. And yet, no one got to this building today in a self-driving car.
But I did try one last month, and it was terrifying.
They exist, yeah. They exist, and yeah, they'll go through their own kind of maturation curve. But But people kind of jump up to in self-driving, they have levels of autonomy. And sort of it's like this ladder. And so at the top of the ladder is level 5, full autonomy, right? And so people assume kind of, oh, let's go straight to level 5, and they skip a bunch of steps. But when you think about, well, where was the value created in all of that? What really changed our lives? It's not yet level 5. We're still on lower parts of the ladder, which are, it has billions of users today is Google Maps, right? Which made navigation autonomous, but it freed us up. And then there's things like highway assist, and we make a similar list of improvements where you get partial self-driving, but really what you're seeing is augmentation, right? My dad used to have an atlas in the back seat of the car where, and I had to print out MapQuest, all the things
I remember
MapQuest,
that very well. I
things.
remember printing out for
We
my
just
dad.
don't worry about that anymore,
Yeah.
right? And our minds are freed up to focus on, on driving or talking to the person in the car or whatever. And but the pattern is like really we're offloading some toil to a machine that does it tirelessly and better than we do. And then we're freed up to do whatever it is that we want to do.
That's theoretically, and I'm just going to jump in quickly and then go to Kristen, but I do think like the act of writing is inextricably linked to the act of
That's
thinking
right.
for me, and then the grooves in your
Sure.
brain, your outlook has been shaped by your ability to
Yeah.
code. I do think, how do we maintain those skill sets, those
Sure.
analytical skill
Yeah.
sets in a time, when's the last time you remembered a phone number or you actually navigated without
Yeah.
a Google map?
Yeah. So there's the skills atrophying is certainly one of the drawbacks of these technologies, or trusting them too much, right? Or sort of delegating your judgment to a machine. It's a problem. So we're going to get both, right? You invent the ship, you
Yeah.
invent the shipwreck.
I'm an optimist, but I think it's something we always have to be aware of. What do you outsource?
Totally.
You don't want to outsource judgment.
No, not at all. That said, I think we also have to see that I actually use AI for writing. It's been transformative for my writing. I don't mean like
You're talking to
draft me
two
a-
journalists. Be careful.
No, sure. Yeah.
No,
No,
I
I love
think there's
writing. And I
Yeah.
agree. There's the writing, like clear writing's clear thinking.
And I use it for headlines for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
But I mean the writing process.
Yeah.
So it actually makes my writing better because, and I think we're going to see AI occupy some interesting roles where it's like a tireless, extremely detail-oriented like editor. It's
Your
not
muse.
it's not the originator, but it's a sparring partner. It's a
Right.
like I actually use AI to think. And then I also use it to, often I'll start by talking through something voice. My interface to AI is usually voice.
So like the Socratic method with your
Yeah,
algorithm.
in a quite literal way. But then, I don't use it to I don't use it to write for me. I use it to organize my thoughts, and pressure tests. Where are there, okay, how could this be better, or where is this not accurate, or where is this not complete, or how else could I be looking at this? And I think it can make the IQ of your writing go up like tens of points, even though it's still the same, same brain. And I think, and it's the interesting part about it is I think the role that AI will play, or the interface, will look more like this, like coach or editor or thought partner, therapist. So I think it's super important to, or we often like clench up when these things come along, but I think it's super important to recognize that this really up-levels us, right? And the photography, and there's usually a panic at the beginning. Like photography did not go away when Photoshop was invented, right? Music did not go away because of Pro Tools or Ableton Live. Now, you did lose. I'm not saying it's all good, right? But and Excel did not end finance or financial analysis. Instead, it democratized it, right? It made everybody, it kind of turned everyone into a B+, could get B+ quality stuff. With your B+ picture with your iPhone, maybe better than that. But it was also true that the people who really knew the fundamentals of photography, or you're talking about coding, the fundamentals of computer science, if you want to get to A+, the craft is even more important and even more differentiating. So if you want to be a really great writer, you still need to understand the fundamentals of writing. And it's really the great writers who will actually stand to benefit the most from AI. If you really are going for A+, not just like
That
pass
makes
fail.
sense. Drew, I want to end on some joy here to go back to Diane's concept of bringing joy. I see you're part of the Diane and I Aura Ring Club
Yes.
over there. Is health and biohacking something you're passionate about too?
Yeah, I just love kind of
What's your
instrumenting
score
everything.
today?
It wasn't that good.
Oh,
It's probably in the
okay.
70s, 60s.
But that's 70s is bad.
The 70s, yeah.
You don't get a crown, but yeah.
No, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Had a bit of a late night with the team.
Ooh, tell us about that.
We have a karaoke tradition at Dropbox. So
You're talking to two karaoke people. So okay, so that brings you joy.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of instrumenting everything, trying to optimize. I mean, you can overdo it. But I do that in my working life for sure. And I think a lot of what I'm excited, like how do I navigate being CEO? Like one way is I use my engineering, hat and a lot of my interest in AI came from actually wanting to automate some of the more like boring and repetitive parts of my job.
Like what?
Town hall meetings. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, and become a better CEO, kind of bionic CEO.
Do you have an avatar? I'm training my avatar so I can interview it on stage.
There you go. Yeah.
Also, what is a bionic CEO? What does that mean?
Well, I think it's a CEO is a well-developed silicon brain. The thing is, we don't really have a silicon brain for CEOs yet. But what does that look like? Well, I mean, back in the day, I would do very basic things like I would read a Peter Drucker book about the effective executive, but then they're like, okay, first chapter is like know thy time, and these books will recommend, audit your time, your calendar to figure out where it goes and make sure you have whatever your priorities are, make sure your calendar matches to it, right? All of us know that's what you're supposed to do. Probably 1% of us succeed in actually doing that in real life.
Like getting things done.
Yeah.
How many of us do that?
Right. And so I think there's this huge disconnect between what we know and what we do, where AI and software can really close that gap. And I think that's something I'm really excited about. So what? And I wanted to learn machine learning, like classical machine learning more formally, because I started Dropbox right after undergrad. I didn't do any grad. I would have been interested in grad work, but but in the manual way of auditing your calendar is about as annoying as it sounds. Like you have to write out all the meetings, manually tag them. And then if you're looking at this from a computer science perspective, you're like, this is like the most automatable thing you can, and why would a human have to do this? And so I'd write little tools to classify my calendar to figure out how much time I'm spending on my priorities, where's my time going. Things like I hate email. Like which of these what do people want? Which of these emails needs a response? Which ones are high priority? Help me triage. And so I think we're going to find all kinds of ways. These are all like level 1 on the ladder. Maybe it's not level 5 answering all my emails for me, but there's a ton of value that you can create on those on the way. And Dash is an example of that, right? No one has a functioning search box. That's going to be like one of the first level of our silicon brain at work is like being able to get to the information you need at work, but then it's going to extend from just like information to like actually helping you do the work and all these assistive tools. And so we have, a very long roadmap of things that we're building. And then, the other blessing from going remote, or really trying to design our working model is that, we basically turned Dropbox into a lab for distributed work. And that was our strategy back in 2020. We're like, look, the world's different. Forcing people back to the office is probably gonna be like trying to force people back into malls and movie theaters. Nothing wrong with the movie theater, but just it's a different world now. So, and it is unproductive if you just sort of try to photocopy what you're doing in the office onto Zoom. But version 3 of this is gonna be a lot better than the version 0.5 that we had in the pandemic. Or that we're all dealing with now. And there's a lot, we don't have to do this. We can be a lot less dumb than like forcing people back into a car 3 days a week or whatever to like literally be back on the same Zoom meeting they would have been at home. Like there's a better way to do this.
Yeah.
But you need design and you need, and then there's all kinds of ways to apply machine intelligence to to offload a lot of the toil or better coordinate ourselves. And things like Dash are just the beginning of that.
Thanks very much. I'll
Thank
tell
you,
you, I
Drew.
will end on saying the management book that I always like is How to Win Friends and Influence
Yep.
People, which both Warren Buffett and Charlie Manson consider to be their favorite book. So on that happy note,
Take
thank
that
you for
advice as
joining
you will.
us.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you.